The morning sun painted the Colorado Territory in shades of gold and amber as Chief Little Wolf stood on the ridge overlooking his village. Below him, the Cheyenne camp was already busy with the sounds of daily life. Women tended fires while children played between the buffalo hide lodges. Warriors prepared their horses for the day's hunt. Everything seemed peaceful, but Little Wolf knew this peace was fragile. The year was 1863, and change was coming to their land like a storm on the horizon. For generations, his people had roamed these vast plains freely, following the buffalo herds and living according to the old ways. But now, more and more white settlers were crossing their territory in covered wagons. Heading west with dreams of gold and farmland, Little Wolf was not like other war chiefs. While many of his fellow leaders spoke only of driving out the invaders, he spent long hours thinking about what the future might hold. He had seen what happened to tribes that fought the endless stream of settlers. The white men kept coming, more and more each year, like leaves falling in autumn. At 35 years old, Little Wolf had already earned great respect among his people. He was known for his wisdom in council meetings and his courage in battle. But what set him apart was something deeper. Even his enemies acknowledged that he fought with honor. He never harmed women, children, or old people. He never tortured prisoners. Some warriors whispered that he was too soft, but Little Wolf believed that true strength came from knowing when not to use violence. This morning was different from others. His scouts had brought troubling news. A large wagon train was approaching from the east, bigger than any they had seen before. More than 50 families were traveling together, their white canvas covers stretched tight over wooden frames. The wagons moved slowly across the prairie. Like a long snake crawling toward the setting sun, Little Wolf called for his horse and rode out to see for himself. From a safe distance, hidden behind a hill, he watched the wagon train roll past. What he saw made him thoughtful. These were not soldiers or gold seekers. These were families. He could see women hanging laundry from the sides of wagons. Children walked alongside the oxen, their laughter carrying on the wind. Babies cried in their mothers' arms. One wagon caught his attention. A young woman sat on the driver's seat, holding the reins with steady hands. Beside her, a small boy pointed excitedly at a hawk circling overhead. The woman smiled and ruffled the child's hair. For a moment, Little Wolf was reminded of his own sister, who had died of sickness too. Winters ago, she had looked at her children with that same gentle love. The wagon train made camp that evening near a stream about 5 miles from the Cheyenne village. Little Wolf watched the smoke from their campfires rise into the darkening sky. He knew that other tribal leaders were also watching. Some were already talking about raiding the camp. The settlers had cattle, horses, and supplies that could help the tribe through the coming winter, but Little Wolf felt uneasy about such talk. These people were not threatening anyone. They were just trying to reach California or Oregon, following the same dreams that had always driven humans to seek better lives. Their presence on Cheyenne land was unwelcome, yes, but they seemed to be passing through rather than staying that night. The tribal council met in the large lodge at the center of the village. The fire in the middle cast dancing shadows on the faces of the gathered men. War Chief Black Hawk spoke first, his voice filled with anger. "These white people take our land piece by piece," Black Hawk said, his dark eyes flashing in the firelight. "First they ask for a small piece to cross, then they build forts. Then they bring more settlers. Soon there will be no room left for the Cheyenne." Many warriors nodded in agreement. The older men remembered when their fathers had first seen white explorers. Those men had promised they only wanted to pass through. Now towns and farms were spreading across the territory. "We should attack the wagon train tomorrow," Black Hawk continued. "Take their horses and cattle. Show them that this is still Cheyenne land." Other voices joined in support. Young warriors eager for battle spoke of counting coup and winning glory. The mood in the lodge grew heated as more men called for war against the settlers. Then Little Wolf stood up. The talking stopped. Everyone knew that when Little Wolf spoke, his words carried weight. "My brothers," he began, his voice calm and steady, I have watched this wagon train. I have seen the people in it. They are not soldiers. They are families with children. Mothers caring for babies, old people who can barely walk. They are still invaders, Black Hawk interrupted. They have no right to be on our land. Little Wolf nodded slowly. That is true. But what kind of victory would we win by attacking mothers and children? Would our ancestors be proud of such deeds? Would the spirits of our own women and children smile upon us if we became killers of the innocent? The lodge fell silent. Little Wolf's words carried the weight of old Cheyenne traditions. Their people had always prided themselves on being noble. Warriors, not butchers of the helpless. Besides, Little Wolf continued, these people are just passing through. In a few days they will be gone from our territory. But if we attack them, soldiers will come looking for revenge. Then we will have a real war on our hands, one that will bring suffering to our own families. An older chief named Gray Eagle spoke up. Little Wolf speaks wisdom. But what happens when more wagon trains come? And more after that? Do we just let them all pass through until there are so many that our hunting grounds are destroyed? This was the question that kept Little Wolf awake at night. He knew that Gray Eagle was right. The stream of settlers would not stop. Every year brought more people seeking new lives in the West. But he also knew that fighting them would only lead to greater tragedy for his people. I do not have all the answers, Little Wolf admitted. But I know that once we start killing their women and children, there will be no going back. The white soldiers will hunt us down like wolves. Our own children will pay the price for our choices today. The debate continued late into the night. Some warriors still favored attacking the wagon train. Others were swayed by Little Wolf's arguments. In the end, the council decided to wait and watch. They would let this wagon train pass unmolested, but they would keep scouts nearby in case the settlers tried to establish permanent camps. As the council meeting ended and the men returned to their lodges, Little Wolf walked alone under the star-filled sky. He thought about the young woman he had seen driving the wagon, and about his own sister who was no longer alive to care for her children. He thought about the future his people faced, caught between the old ways and a changing world. In the distance, he could see the glow of the settlers' campfires. Somewhere in those wagons, mothers were tucking their children into bed, probably telling them stories about the new homes they would build when they reached their destination. Those mothers had no idea how close they had come to danger this night. Little Wolf made a silent promise to himself. As long as he had breath in his body, he would not let harm come to innocent people, no matter what color their skin or where they came from. It was a promise that would change his life forever, and eventually cost him everything he held dear. The next morning, the wagon train rolled on westward, leaving only wheel ruts in the prairie grass to mark their passage. But the questions they had raised in Little Wolf's mind would not be so easily erased. A collision between two worlds had begun, and there would be no turning back. 2 months had passed since that first wagon train crossed Cheyenne territory. Little Wolf had hoped that letting them pass peacefully would be the right choice. But the world seemed determined to test his beliefs in the worst possible way. The news came at dawn, delivered by one of his fastest scouts. Running Bear burst into Little Wolf's lodge, his face grim and his horse covered in sweat from a hard ride through the night. "Chief, you must hear this," Running Bear gasped, still catching his breath. "Black Hawk's warriors have attacked a settler wagon train. They took prisoners." Little Wolf felt his stomach drop. This was exactly what he had feared would happen. "How many wagons?" he asked, already reaching for his weapons. "Only 3 wagons, but they were traveling alone, separated from a larger group," Running Bear explained. "Black Hawk's men killed the fathers and older sons. They took the women and children back to their camp in the Red Canyon." The Red Canyon was 2 days' ride to the north, deep in territory controlled by Black Hawk's faction. Little Wolf had been feuding with Black Hawk for years over how to deal with the white settlers. While Little Wolf counseled caution and selective conflict, Black Hawk believed in total war against all whites. "How many prisoners?" Little Wolf asked, his mind already working on possibilities. 5 women and 4 children, Running Bear replied. One of the women had just given birth. The baby. He paused, looking uncomfortable. The baby did not survive the journey. Little Wolf closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of this tragedy. He had argued for peace, and now innocent blood had been spilled anyway. The settlers would blame all Cheyenne for Black Hawk's actions. Soldiers would come seeking revenge, and his own people would suffer for crimes they did not commit. But there was something else troubling him even more deeply. Somewhere in that distant canyon, terrified mothers were probably holding their children close, not knowing if they would live to see another sunrise. In his mind, he could picture their faces, could imagine their fear and desperation. His wife, Singing Bird, had been listening from the back of the lodge. Now she came forward and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I know what you are thinking," she said quietly, "and I know what you must do." Little Wolf looked into her eyes and saw understanding there, mixed with worry. She knew him better than anyone, knew that he could not let innocent people suffer when he had the power to help them. "This will be dangerous," he told her. "If Black Hawk discovers what I plan to do, he will call me a traitor. Some of our own people might turn against us." Singing Bird nodded. "But if you do nothing, you will never forgive yourself. And the spirits of those innocent children will haunt your dreams forever." Within an hour, Little Wolf had assembled a small group of his most trusted warriors. These were men who had followed him into battle many times, men who understood his code of honor. There was Swift Arrow, his childhood friend and best tracker; Stone Bear, a giant of a man who could fight like 3 ordinary warriors; Young Wolf, Little Wolf's nephew, eager to prove himself; and Running Bear, whose speed and knowledge of the territory would be crucial. Little Wolf gathered them in a circle outside the village, away from curious ears. "What I'm about to ask of you goes against everything our people expect," he began. "We are going to rescue Black Hawk's prisoners and return them to their own kind." The warriors exchanged glances. This was indeed unexpected. Warriors were supposed to take captives, not free them. Young Wolf spoke first. "Uncle, I do not understand. These are enemies of our people. Why should we risk our lives to save them?" Little Wolf had wrestled with this question himself. Because they are not warriors. They are mothers and children who did nothing wrong except be born with different colored skin. If we become the kind of people who harm the innocent, how are we different from our worst enemies? Swift Arrow nodded slowly. "I remember the stories our grandfathers told. They said a true warrior protects those who cannot protect themselves, even if they are strangers." "Exactly," Little Wolf said. "This is not about helping our enemies. This is about staying true to what it means to be Cheyenne." The plan they developed was simple but dangerous. They would travel fast and light, reaching the Red Canyon by the second night. Black Hawk's camp was built in a narrow valley with only one easy way in or out. But Little Wolf knew of an old hunting trail that led down the back cliff face. It was treacherous, especially in the dark, but it would get them close to where prisoners were usually kept. The rescue would have to happen quickly and quietly. Once they freed the captives, they would need to get them far away before Black Hawk discovered what had happened. The nearest army fort was 3 days' ride to the south. If they could reach it, the women and children would be safe. They left that same evening, telling no one else in the village where they were going. Little Wolf's heart was heavy as he kissed his wife goodbye, not knowing if he would ever see her again. The journey to Red Canyon tested both their horses and their resolve. They rode through the night, pausing only to rest their mounts and check their weapons. Little Wolf found himself thinking about the prisoners, wondering if they were still alive, if they had been harmed. On the second evening, they reached the rim of Red Canyon just as the sun was setting. From their hiding place among the rocks, they could see Black Hawk's camp spread out below. Smoke rose from dozens of fires, and they could hear the sound of drums and singing. The warriors were celebrating their recent victory. Through his spyglass, Little Wolf spotted the prisoners. They were tied up near the center of the camp, guarded by 2 young warriors who seemed more interested in the celebration than in watching. Captives. The sight of them made his anger burn hot. The women looked exhausted and terrified. The children clung to their mothers, their small faces streaked with tears. "There," he whispered to his men, pointing to a cluster of lodges. "That is where they are being held. We wait until the celebration dies down, then we move." The hours crawled by slowly. Finally, near midnight, the singing stopped and most of the fires burned low. Little Wolf led his men down the treacherous cliff path, testing each foothold carefully. In the darkness, one slip would send them tumbling to their deaths and doom the rescue mission. At the bottom of the cliff, they crept through the shadows between the lodges. The two guards had fallen asleep, probably helped by whatever they had been drinking during the celebration. Swift Arrow and Stone Bear quickly tied them up while Little Wolf cut the ropes binding the prisoners. The women were so shocked they could barely speak. One of them, a young mother holding a baby, started to cry when she realized they were being rescued rather than taken somewhere worse. "Please do not make noise," Little Wolf whispered in his broken English. "We take you to safety, but we must be very quiet." Getting 9 people up the cliff path in complete darkness was even harder than coming down. The children were frightened and confused. The women, weakened by their ordeal, struggled with the climb. But somehow, working together, they managed to reach the top just as dawn was breaking over the canyon. They could hear shouts from below as Black Hawk's warriors discovered the empty ropes and unconscious guards. Soon pursuit would follow Little Wolf put the weakest prisoners on horses while his warriors ran alongside. They had perhaps an hour's head start, maybe less. Everything depended on reaching the fort before Black Hawk caught up with them. The race across the prairie became a blur of pounding hooves and worried glances over their shoulders. The rescued women, despite their exhaustion, seemed to understand that these Cheyenne warriors were risking everything to save them. When Little Wolf's horse stumbled and went lame, one of the women insisted he share her mount. 3 days later, dust-covered and exhausted, they reached the gates of Fort Collins. The soldiers inside could hardly believe what they were seeing, a Cheyenne war chief delivering rescued prisoners. Instead of attacking the fort, as the women and children were taken inside to safety, one of them turned back to Little Wolf. She was the young mother with the baby, and tears were streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said simply. "I will never forget what you did for us." Little Wolf nodded and turned his horse away. He had kept his promise to protect the innocent, but he knew this was only the beginning. Word of what he had done would spread quickly, creating enemies among his own people and confusion among the whites. As they rode back toward home, Swift Arrow asked the question they were all thinking. "What happens now, my chief?" Little Wolf looked back once at the fort, where smoke was rising from the chimneys and children were probably sleeping safely in their mother's arms. "Now we face the consequences of doing what we believed was right," he said, "and we pray that someday others will understand why we made this choice." The trouble started even before Little Wolf and his warriors made it back to their village. Word travels fast across the prairie, carried by riders and smoke signals. By the time they reached home, everyone already knew what had happened at Red Canyon. The village was divided. Some people looked at Little Wolf with pride, whispering that he had shown true Cheyenne honor by protecting the helpless. But others turned away when he passed, their faces dark with disapproval. Children who used to run up to greet him now stayed close to their mothers, confused by the tension they could feel but didn't understand. The worst part was the silence from the elders. These were the men whose wisdom had guided the tribe for decades, and their opinion mattered more than anyone else's. When Little Wolf went to the council lodge that first evening back, he found it nearly empty. Only 3 old men sat by the fire, and they barely looked up when he entered. Gray Eagle, the eldest, finally spoke without lifting his eyes from the flames. "Black Hawk has sent word to all the tribes," he said quietly. "He calls you a traitor to your own people. He says you care more about white women than Cheyenne children." Little Wolf felt the words like physical blows. "And what do you believe?" "Grandfather," Gray Eagle was quiet for a long moment. "I believe you did what your heart told you was right. But I also know that your heart may have doomed us all." The old man was right to be worried. Within days, the consequences of the rescue began piling up like storm clouds. Black Hawk sent war parties to raid wagon trains with even more violence than before, claiming he had to make up for Little Wolf's weakness. Each attack brought more soldiers into Cheyenne territory, looking for revenge against any Native Americans they could find, but the worst news came from Running Bear, who had been scouting the eastern trails. "Chief," he said, his voice tight with worry, "there's another wagon train coming, bigger than any we have seen. More than 20 families, with children and old people. And Black Hawk knows about it too." Little Wolf's blood went cold. He knew exactly what Black Hawk was planning. Another attack, bigger and more brutal than the last one. More innocent people would die and more prisoners would be taken. The cycle of violence would continue, and his own people would be hunted like animals in response. That night, as he lay beside his sleeping wife, Little Wolf stared at the roof of their lodge and wondered if he had made everything worse by trying to do good. Maybe the other warriors were right. Maybe kindness was a luxury they could not afford in these harsh times. But then he remembered the face of the young mother he had rescued, the tears of gratitude in her eyes as she thanked him. At the fort gates. Could he really have left her and her baby to suffer and die? What kind of man would that have made him? 3 days later, his scouts brought the news he had been dreading. Black Hawk's war party had struck again. This time, they had attacked the large wagon train and taken 8 women and 6 children prisoner. The warriors had killed every man and boy old enough to hold a weapon, leaving their bodies scattered across the prairie. "Where are the prisoners now?" Little Wolf asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Black Hawk has taken them deep into the Badlands," Swift Arrow replied, "to the old ceremonial caves where our grandfathers used to hide from the Crow warriors. It is 3 days' ride, and the path is treacherous." Little Wolf knew those caves. They were sacred places, carved into red rock cliffs that rose like castle walls from the desert floor. Getting to them required traveling through narrow canyons where a small force could easily defend against a much larger army. If Black Hawk had taken the prisoners there, rescuing them would be almost impossible, but not completely. Little Wolf had played in those caves as a boy, exploring every tunnel and hidden passage. He knew secrets that even Black Hawk might have forgotten, but this time, the decision was even harder than before. After the first rescue, he had hoped that people would understand his actions. Instead, he had become more isolated than ever. Half his own tribe considered him a traitor, while the white soldiers still saw him as just another hostile Indian. His wife found him sitting alone by the river that evening, watching the water flow past in the fading light. "You are thinking about going after them again," she said. "It was not a question. How can I not?" he replied. "Those women and children did nothing wrong. They are probably terrified, not knowing if they will live through another day." Singing Bird sat down beside him on the riverbank. "And what about our own children? What about our people? Every time you save white prisoners, Black Hawk becomes more angry. He is already talking about challenging your leadership. Some of the young warriors are starting to listen to him." Little Wolf knew she was right. By following his conscience, he was putting his own family and tribe at risk. But the alternative seemed even worse. If I become the kind of leader who can watch innocent people suffer and do nothing, what kind of tribe will we become? He asked. What kind of world will we leave for our children? His wife took his hand. I married a man of honor, she said softly. I will not ask you to become someone else now, even if it would be safer. The next morning, Little Wolf faced an even bigger challenge than before. When he asked for volunteers to help with another rescue mission, only 2 warriors stepped forward. Swift Arrow, his loyal friend since childhood, and Young Wolf, his nephew. Even Running Bear and Stone Bear, who had helped with the first rescue, shook their heads. This is madness, Stone Bear said sadly. Black Hawk will be expecting you this time. He will have guards posted and traps set. 3 men cannot succeed where 50 might fail. But Little Wolf had already made his decision. With or without help, he could not abandon those prisoners to whatever fate. Black Hawk had planned for them. The journey to the Badlands was the longest 3 days of his life. The desert was unforgiving, with scorching heat during the day and bitter cold at night. Their water ran low, and their horses struggled across the rocky ground. But worse than the physical hardships was the knowledge that they were probably riding to their deaths. On the third evening, they reached the edge of the canyon where the ceremonial caves were hidden. From their position on the rim, they could see Black Hawk's camp spread out below. Cooking fires dotted the canyon floor, and they could hear the sound of drums echoing off the rock walls. Finding the prisoners took hours of careful observation. Finally, Swift Arrow spotted them. They were being held in one of the larger caves, guarded by 6 warriors. Even from a distance, Little Wolf could see that the captives were in bad condition. Some of the women could barely stand, and the children huddled close to their mothers like frightened animals. Among the prisoners was a woman who caught Little Wolf's attention. She appeared to be older than the others, maybe a teacher or a minister's wife. Unlike the other captives, she was not just sitting in despair. She was moving among the other prisoners, offering comfort and checking on the children. Even in her own terror, she was trying to help others. "That one," Little Wolf whispered to his companions. "She is strong. If we can free them, she will help keep the others calm during the escape." The rescue plan was desperate and probably hopeless. They would have to wait until the darkest part of the night, then climb down into the canyon using ropes. After taking out the guards silently, they would have to get 14 prisoners back up the cliff face and away from the camp before anyone noticed they were gone. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The rope broke when they were halfway down the cliff, sending young Wolf tumbling into the rocks below. He survived but injured his leg badly. One of the guards woke up just as Swift Arrow was trying to tie him up, and they had to fight hand to hand in the darkness to keep him quiet. Worst of all, the prisoners were in worse condition than they had appeared from above. 3 of the children were too weak to climb, and 2 of the women had been beaten so badly they could barely walk. But somehow, working together with desperate determination, they managed to get everyone out of the cave and up to the canyon rim. The older woman Little Wolf had noticed proved to be exactly the leader he had hoped for. Despite her own exhaustion and fear, she helped organize the other prisoners and kept the children quiet during the dangerous climb. As they fled across the desert with pursuit closing in behind them, she rode beside Little Wolf and spoke in surprisingly good English mixed with a few Cheyenne words she had learned during her captivity. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Your own people will call you a traitor for helping us." Little Wolf was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something he was not sure he fully understood himself. "Because it is right," he finally said, "and because someone must show that there can be honor between our peoples even in these dark times." The woman nodded. "My name is Catherine," she said. "I am a school teacher from Missouri. I want you to know that I will remember what you have done. I will tell people that not all Cheyenne are enemies. Maybe someday that will matter." They reached the safety of Fort Collins just as Black Hawk's warriors appeared on the horizon behind them. This time, the soldiers were ready for Little Wolf's arrival. Word of his first rescue had spread, and the fort commander himself came out to meet them. Word of Little Wolf's second rescue spread through the frontier like wildfire. For the first time since the troubles began, people in the settlements were talking about a Cheyenne chief who saved lives instead of taking them. Catherine, the schoolteacher he had rescued, wrote letters to newspapers back east, telling the story of the warrior who risked everything to protect strangers. But fame, Little Wolf was learning, could be just as dangerous as obscurity. 3 weeks after the rescue at the sacred caves, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Cheyenne village. A lone rider approached under a white flag of truce, his blue cavalry uniform dusty from the long journey across the prairie. The entire village gathered to watch as the soldier dismounted and asked to speak with Chief Little Wolf. The man introduced himself as Colonel Thompson from Fort Collins. He was younger than Little Wolf had expected, maybe 35 years old, with honest eyes and calloused hands that showed he was a working soldier, not just a desk officer. "Chief Little Wolf," Colonel Thompson said in careful English, "I come here not as an enemy, but as someone who wants to understand. The women you saved have told me things that are hard to believe. They say you are different from other war chiefs. Little Wolf studied the officer's face, looking for signs of deception or trap. Finding none, he gestured for the colonel to sit by the fire outside his lodge. This was risky. Many of his own people were already angry about his rescue missions. Being seen talking peacefully with a cavalry officer might make things even worse. What do you want to know? Little Wolf asked. Colonel Thompson leaned forward. I want to know if it is possible for our peoples to live without killing each other. The women you saved said you spoke of honor between our tribes. Is that really what you believe? For the next hour, the two men talked like human beings rather than enemies. Little Wolf explained his vision of a world where both peoples could share the vast territory, where wagon trains could pass safely while native hunting grounds remained protected. Colonel Thompson listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. If this could work, the colonel finally said, what would you need from my government? Little Wolf had thought about this question many times during sleepless nights. Safe passages for your wagon trains through certain areas marked and agreed upon. In return, protection of our hunting grounds and promises that no permanent settlements will be built there without tribal consent. Colonel Thompson nodded. Slowly, and what about men like Black Hawk who want total war? That is the problem I cannot solve alone, Little Wolf admitted. As long as some of your people see all Indians as enemies and some of my people see all whites as invaders, there will always be those who choose violence over peace. The colonel stood to leave, but before mounting his horse he turned back to Little Wolf with a serious expression. Chief, I want you to know that there are men in the territorial government who might listen to proposals like yours. But there are also those who believe the only good Indian is a dead Indian. You would be taking great risks if you chose to pursue this path. Little Wolf watched the officer ride away, disappearing into the heat shimmer on the horizon. He knew the colonel was right about the risks, but he also knew that doing nothing would lead to the destruction of his people. Maybe it was time to take chances that seemed impossible. That evening, the tribal council met to discuss the colonel's visit. The mood in the lodge was darker than Little Wolf had ever seen it. Even men who had supported him in the past were now questioning his judgment. First you rescue white prisoners, said Windrunner, an older warrior. Now you make treaties with their soldiers. What is next? Will you invite them to share our lodges and marry our daughters? Young voices joined in the criticism. Warriors, who had grown up hearing stories of white betrayals, could not understand why their chief would trust any promise from the cavalry, but it was Gray Eagle, the eldest and most respected member of the council, who delivered the words that cut deepest. Little Wolf, he said sadly, I have watched you grow from a boy into a great warrior and leader, but I fear that your good heart is leading our people toward destruction. Sometimes kindness is a luxury that a chief cannot afford. The debate raged for hours. Some men spoke of the old days when the Cheyenne were strong and feared, when no enemy dared to cross their territory. Others worried about their children's future if the conflict continued to escalate. Finally, Little Wolf stood to address the council. My brothers, I understand your concerns, but I have seen what total war looks like. I have seen the bodies of women and children left on the prairie. I have seen our own young men die for causes that bring us nothing but more enemies. He paused, looking into the faces of men he had known all his life. If we choose the path of endless fighting, our children will inherit nothing but graves and burned villages. Someone must be willing to try a different way, even if it seems hopeless. The council took no official position that night, but Little Wolf could feel the tide turning against him. His own people were losing faith in his leadership, and he was not sure he could blame them. What he did not know was that his enemies were already planning to use his moment of weakness against him. 2 days later, Black Hawk struck with devastating effectiveness. But this time his target was not just random settlers. This time he had chosen his victims specifically to destroy Little Wolf's reputation forever. The attack came at dawn, hitting a small wagon train of only 5 families. But these were not ordinary pioneers. Among the victims were a missionary and his wife, a doctor traveling to establish a clinic in California, and 2 families with young children who were well known in the territory for their fair treatment of Native Americans. Black Hawk's warriors killed the men quickly, but they left the women and children alive long enough to hear a carefully planned message. Before taking them prisoner, the war chief made sure they understood who was responsible for their suffering. "Your friend Little Wolf cannot save you this time," Black Hawk told the terrified captives. "He has made us weak with his foolish mercy. Now you will pay the price for his betrayals." But the cruelest part of Black Hawk's plan was what he did next. Instead of taking the prisoners to his own territory, he moved them to an abandoned Cheyenne camp in Little Wolf's traditional hunting grounds. He left clear signs that Little Wolf's band had been there recently. He even scattered some items that belonged to Little Wolf's warriors, things that had been stolen during raids on their village. When the cavalry patrol found the massacre site 3 days later, all the evidence pointed to Little Wolf as the killer. The surviving tracks led directly toward his village. The scattered belongings seemed to prove that his warriors had been involved in the attack. Colonel Thompson, who had been preparing to present Little Wolf's peace proposals to his superiors, received the devastating news while at his headquarters. The same women who had praised Little Wolf's mercy were now crying for his blood, convinced that he had betrayed their trust in the most horrible way possible. "I should have known better than to trust a savage," Catherine, the schoolteacher, said through her tears when she heard the news. "He was probably planning this all along, gaining our confidence just to make us easier targets." Within hours, wanted posters were being printed with Little Wolf's name and description. The territorial governor issued a bounty for his capture, dead or alive. Every cavalry unit in the region received orders to hunt down the renegade chief, who had fooled them all with false promises of peace, but the worst blow came from his own people. When word of the accusations reached the Cheyenne village, many warriors who had been wavering in their support finally turned against him completely. "We told you this would happen," Windrunner said angrily at an emergency council meeting. "Your friendship with the whites has brought soldiers to our door. Now they hunt us all because of your actions." Even some of his most loyal followers began to have doubts. Had their chief really been playing a double game all along? The evidence seemed overwhelming, and few people knew Black Hawk well enough to recognize his cunning. Little Wolf tried to explain what had really happened, but his words fell on skeptical ears. In a world where trust was already rare, his previous rescues now seemed like proof of a twisted plot rather than evidence of his innocence. "Think about it," he pleaded with the council. "Why would I rescue prisoners just to kill others later? What sense would that make?" But Gray Eagle shook his head sadly. "Perhaps you were trying to win their trust so you could strike a bigger blow later. Or perhaps you have been driven mad by trying to serve 2 masters. Either way, you have brought disaster upon our people." That night, as Little Wolf sat alone outside his lodge, his wife came to him with tears in her eyes. "Some of the warriors are talking about exile," she whispered. "They say you are no longer fit to be chief. They want to send you away before. The soldiers come looking for you here." Little Wolf looked up at the stars, the same stars that had guided his people for countless generations. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed for, was crumbling around him. His efforts to build peace had instead brought suspicion from both sides. "Maybe they are right," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been a fool to think." Little Wolf knew his time was running out. For 2 weeks he had been living like a hunted animal, moving his small band of loyal followers from one hiding place to another. The cavalry patrols were getting closer each day, and his own people had made it clear he was no longer welcome in any Cheyenne village, but running and hiding went against everything he believed in. Somewhere out there, Black Hawk still held the prisoners from the massacre that had destroyed Little Wolf's reputation. Those innocent women and children were suffering while he skulked in caves and dry creek beds, trying to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. The decision came to him on a cold morning in late autumn. His nephew, young Wolf, still limping from the injury he had received during the cave rescue, brought news that made Little Wolf's blood boil. "Uncle," young Wolf said quietly, "our scouts have found Black Hawk's camp." He has moved the prisoners to Devil's Ridge, where the old buffalo hunting trails meet. But there is something else you need to know. Little Wolf waited, though he could see in his nephew's eyes that the news was bad. Black Hawk is planning to kill all the prisoners in 3 days during the new moon. He wants to leave their bodies, where the cavalry will find them, with more evidence pointing to you as the killer. The trap was perfect. Black Hawk would eliminate the only witnesses who could prove Little Wolf's innocence, while creating even more evidence of his guilt. By the time the bodies were discovered, Little Wolf would be remembered forever as the most treacherous villain in frontier history. "How many prisoners?" Little Wolf asked. 12 women and 8 children. They are being held in the old trading post at the ridge. Black Hawk has 30 warriors with him, maybe more. Swift Arrow, who had been listening from nearby, shook his head. "This is madness, my friend. Even if we could rescue them, where would we go? Every fort, every settlement, every tribe considers you an enemy now. There is nowhere left to run." Little Wolf looked around at the handful of men who had remained loyal to him. Besides Swift Arrow and young Wolf, there were only 4 other warriors. 7 men against 30 or more, with no hope of escape even if they succeeded. It was a suicide mission, but as he thought about those prisoners, probably huddled together in fear, waiting for death to come in 3 days, Little Wolf knew he had no choice. This was who he was. This was what he had always been, even when it cost him everything. "I cannot live with myself if I let innocent people die when I have the power to save them," he told his followers. "I will not ask any of you to follow me this time. You have already sacrificed too much for my choices." To his surprise, every man stepped forward. "We have followed you this far," Swift Arrow said simply. "We will not abandon you now." They spent the next day planning what everyone knew would be their final mission. Devil's Ridge was a natural fortress, with steep cliffs on 3 sides and only one narrow approach through a rocky canyon. Black Hawk had chosen the location perfectly. Any rescue attempt would have to come straight into the teeth of his defenses, but Little Wolf had one advantage that Black Hawk might not expect. In his desperation to frame Little Wolf, Black Hawk had made one crucial mistake. He had told the prisoners that Little Wolf was their real enemy, that he was the one who had ordered their capture and planned their deaths. "If we can reach them and prove who we really are," Little Wolf explained to his men, "they might help us instead of fighting us. Some of those women saw me during the previous rescues. They will remember." The attack began just before dawn on the night of the new moon. Little Wolf's tiny force split into 2 groups, approaching the trading post from opposite directions. The plan was simple: create enough confusion to free the prisoners, then fight their way out before Black Hawk's superior numbers could surround them. Everything went wrong from the start. The first group, led by Swift Arrow, was spotted by sentries. Before they reached the building, the alarm cry echoed across the ridge, and suddenly the darkness erupted with war whoops and gunfire. Black Hawk's warriors poured out of their hiding places like angry hornets. Little Wolf's group managed to reach the trading post, where they found the prisoners huddled in a back room, tied up and terrified. When the women saw Little Wolf burst through the door, several of them screamed, believing their executioner had come early. "Please," one of them sobbed, "we have children. Do not hurt the children." Little Wolf quickly cut their bonds while bullets splintered the wooden walls around them. "I am not here to hurt you," he said urgently. "I am here to save you. Some of you know me. You have seen me before." In the dim light from the fires burning outside, one of the older women suddenly recognized him. It was Helen, a minister's wife who had been in the second wagon train he had rescued months earlier. "You," she whispered in amazement. "You are the chief who saved us before, but they said you were the one who—" "Black Hawk lied," Little Wolf said quickly. "He is the one who captured you. I came to take you home." Understanding dawned on the faces of the women who had seen him before. They quickly explained to the others, and suddenly the prisoners were helping instead of hindering the rescue. But outside, the battle was going badly. Little Wolf could hear the sound of fighting getting closer as Black Hawk's warriors overwhelmed Swift Arrow's group. They had only minutes before the building would be surrounded. "Can you run?" he asked the women. Helen nodded. "We will do whatever you need us to do." Getting 20 prisoners out of the building and through the battle raging outside was like trying to lead sheep through a pack of wolves. Black Hawk's warriors were everywhere, and they showed no mercy to anyone trying to escape. Little Wolf found himself fighting the battle of his life, using every skill he had learned in 30 years of warfare. His rifle ran out of ammunition, so he fought with his war club. When that broke against an enemy's skull, he drew his knife and kept fighting. Around him, his loyal followers were falling one by one. Young Wolf took an arrow through the chest, but kept fighting until he collapsed. Swift Arrow fought like a demon until 3 warriors overwhelmed him at once, but somehow, impossibly, they were winning. The prisoners had reached the horses, and most of them were already mounted and ready to flee. Helen and 2 other women were helping load the children, their faces determined despite their terror. That was when Little Wolf saw Black Hawk himself, approaching through the smoke and chaos. His enemy's face was twisted with rage as he realized that his perfect plan was falling apart. "You should have died quietly like a dog," Black Hawk snarled, raising his rifle. Little Wolf was exhausted, bleeding from a dozen wounds, and had no ammunition left. But he stood straight and faced his enemy without fear. "I'd die as I lived," he replied, "protecting those who cannot protect themselves." The shot echoed across Devil's Ridge like thunder. Little Wolf felt the bullet tear through his chest, but somehow he remained standing. With his last strength, he lunged forward and tackled Black Hawk, sending them both tumbling toward the cliff edge. The 2 chiefs fought desperately on the narrow ledge, each trying to throw the other into the abyss below. Little Wolf's wounds were slowing him down, but his determination gave him strength that his body no longer possessed. In the end, they fell together, locked in their final struggle, disappearing into the darkness of the canyon, the remaining prisoners. And Little Wolf's surviving warriors made it safely to Fort Collins 3 days later. Helen, the minister's wife, told Colonel Thompson everything that had happened. She explained how Black Hawk had framed Little Wolf, how the real villain had planned to murder all the witnesses, and how Little Wolf had died saving the very people who had been convinced he was their enemy. Colonel Thompson listened with growing horror and shame. He had been so quick to believe the worst about a man who had repeatedly proven his honor. Now that man was dead, along with most of his loyal followers, and the truth had come too late. The colonel wrote long reports to his superiors, explaining Little Wolf's innocence and recommending that his name be cleared officially. But the bureaucrats in Washington were not interested in admitting their mistake. It was easier to let people believe that the problem had been solved with Little Wolf's death. Within a year, most people had forgotten the whole story. The rescued women tried to keep Little Wolf's memory alive, writing letters and giving speeches about the Cheyenne chief who had saved them. But their voices were drowned out by louder stories of Indian wars and cavalry victories. Helen never forgot, though. She returned to her home in Ohio and spent the rest of her life writing down everything she remembered about Little Wolf. She collected stories from other women he had saved, gathering testimony that proved his innocence beyond any doubt. But by the time she finished her work, the frontier was already becoming legend instead of living memory. The complex truth about men like Little Wolf was lost in simpler stories about heroes and villains, cowboys and Indians. Years later, when historians tried to piece together what had really happened during those violent times, they found only fragments. A few army reports that mentioned a friendly chief, some letters from rescued women, stories passed down by tribal elders who remembered a leader who had tried to walk between 2 worlds.